The American economy's collapse is now irreversible.
Someone says it's irreversible.
Well, it's discussed by Dylan Ratigan and Jimmy Dore, but someone else wrote the article. Let's take a look.
So let's bring in our friend of the show, award-winning reporter, best-selling New York Times author, former host of his own show on MSNBC, and he's here and also on the new podcast, Truth or Skepticism, with Tom Sosnoff at Tasty Trade. It's Dylan Ratigan. Hi, Dylan. How are you?
No, I love getting the little inside Hollywood tips.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's why I do this show.
That's right. Umair Haq has written another article that is even more depressing and ominous than his last one. And the headline...
It's hard to conceive of.
It's
Umair
hard to
Haq
conceive, but he did it.
That's his name.
Here he
who
says...
wrote this
Tries
article.
hard. He's a Harvard guy, so he's skilled. He really works at it.
So we're going to go through some of it. It's a very long article. I pulled out some paragraphs we'll read.
Medium has a lot of...
The headline is, "It's not that I'm negative. America really is screwed. Why economists say America's collapse is probably irreversible." So here, let's get into it. The economics of American collapse say that it's probably too late to fix America. It's probably that this is the new normal. Chaos, decline, incompetence, malice, poverty, hopelessness, and despair. That's the new normal. Now, the reason that America collapsed is straightforward. Americans never invested in building expansive social systems. Unlike Europe, systems to provide health care, retirement, child care, finance, and so forth. The result has been twofold. One, the average American now goes without these things. That's because they're largely unavailable. For example, the fresh food that I can get on any block in Europe is simply absent in huge chunks of the United States. You buy processed food or you don't get food. The same is true of many, many things, like, say, education or income. You don't have a job with guarantees and protections like in Canada or Europe. You have a lower quality, not just quantity of income. Two, the average American pays prices that the rest of the world considers absolutely absurd. Because they are, for the very same things. Having a child, that'll be $50,000. An operation, that'll be more than a house. You want to educate your kid, there goes your life savings. You want some fresh apples, that'll be 10 times the price Canadians or Europeans pay. These things, the basics of life, are eminently affordable in the rest of the rich world. In America, though, they cost more than the average person can afford. Sure, they might have a big car and a big house and a big gun, but the economic truth is this. All those things are had on debt. And the average American now lives like an impoverished person. No savings, no assets, no liquidity. 80%, that's 80% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, struggle to pay basic bills, and can't raise $500 for an emergency. Those are the statistics of a nation having descended into poverty. The economists say that America has more or less, almost certainly, reached a point of no return, and collapse is nearly inevitable. To stop collapse, America would have to start investing massively, suddenly, historically, in functioning systems. Every single facet of American collapse requires massive, large-scale, sustained public investment to be turned around. That goes on for a decade or more. The bitter truth is this. Americans are now too poor to afford a better social contract. Even if Americans support a Canadian or European-style social contract, the hard economic truth is that they are probably now too poor to ever even have one. Americans didn't want to pay those higher taxes Europeans and Canadians did. They believed the strange, foolish, and evidence-free ideologies of trickle-down economics and neoliberalism and all the rest of it. We'll all be the richest if we invest in precisely nothing together. Nobody should care about anyone else. Nobody should ever support anyone else in the pursuit of anything. Life was to be purely individualistic, adversarial, and acquisitive. That led Americans straight into a poverty trap. They were paying lower taxes, sure, but their public goods were decaying. Their commonwealth was eroding. Their systems and institutions were corroding. To achieve European or Canadian-like living standards, how much would America have to invest now? Probably dozens of trillions. Much, much more than average Americans all put together can afford to spend right now.
Get on it, J-Pal.
Those are the brutal economics of collapse. Societies who let themselves become poor can hardly then wave a magic wand and become rich. It's too late for America to recover. It left it too long. It was arrogant and conceited, paying for things it didn't need, like wars and mega mansions, but not the things that it did need. So it didn't invest when it should have. But now the bill is due, but nobody can pay it. What would you call a society like that? Bankrupt? Just like most Americans are, only they don't know it yet. What do you call a whole society of people, after all, who die in debt? America's broke, my friends, and when you're broke, what do you have left to invest in yourself? There's one way to get out of this, by the way. If you followed me closely, give people money. No strings attached, no questions asked. Now and on a large scale, more or less permanently, forget how much needs to be borrowed to make it happen so people can fund a working society again, or else. That's the big question for America. The rest is noise. Until something along those lines begins to take shape, my answer is simple. Americans made themselves too poor to now afford to have the luxury of a functioning, civilized, modern society. Or is all that a necessity? So there's the, all right.
So that's interesting because I feel like we've went through like this season where, or just years where we thought taxes were bad. And he's saying because of that mindset, our public goods were decaying. And now to like catch up to where like Canada or Europe is, it would cost us $12 trillion. And so that's why, in perspective,
they had been investing decades ago.
Well, I think
less,
after
it compounds.
after the war, after World War II, Europe was forced to recover
restructure
in a way where everyone was poor. But the U.S. hasn't really gone through that in a long time, and except maybe like 100 years ago. And so it's like when you talk about the number like 12 trillion to get us back to it. Whereas UBI or Universal Basic Income is like $350 a month if everyone, or $350 billion a month if everyone gets. It's like
$350 billion.
That's like $4 trillion a year, just over $4 trillion a year. And so it's like at this point, giving people money is cheaper. Like 2 years of UBI until like a coronavirus gets out is $4 trillion cheaper than trying to get our system set up. But even it's not going to solve anything, though, even with UBI. We're just going to keep continuing on. I guess that's what they mean by this is the new normal. It's just a two-class system. There's going to be really poor people and really rich people in the United States. All right, well, let's keep going.
Yeah.
Now let's break it down with Dylan Ratigan. Come on. There's no way.
I mean, he's a little too pessimistic, but I think that it's really important to read and understand what Umair is saying, to understand what is we're on a trajectory for what he's describing. And I'm not willing to accept what he's saying as a certainty for this country.
He's like, that guy's too
but I think
pessimistic.
it's important to understand what he's saying so that you can understand the risk of what's at stake right now, and understand how simple really, just, I mean, I don't know how many times we have to say Medicare for all and universal basic income, but I mean, the tragedy of the current situation is how simple it would be to fix were it not for the political stranglehold. Maybe I have a smidgen of my own, perhaps naivete that wants to believe that there is some aspect of resilience in the because there's so much consensus in the American people that the government has failed. because there's so much clarity, whether the polls are at 65 to 80% in terms of the indictment of both parties, in terms of the support for a national health care system, in terms of a support for massive voter reform. I feel like when there's so much consensus inside the American people, I don't know how it manifests itself to you. I realize I'm missing the final connection to how that sentiment converts into real meaningful reform of some kind. But it's hard for me to see how 3 to 4 out of 5 people could understand what's being done to them and do nothing about it unless the media and the politicians are so successful at pointing those people at each other as the culprit, as opposed to allowing them to line up against the politicians, which is sort of what the primary purpose of the media is, to make sure that you think it was the other side.
Exactly.
So that's a good point. It's like he's saying there's a consensus on things that are wrong, but he's saying like he doesn't really see how that translates into action in the United States. And he says, where like 3 or 4 out of 5 people like agree that like the economics in the United States are messed up.
Yeah.
What gets to them before they can get together is the politicizing of it. Like, how did wearing masks become political in the United States, where everyone else in the world just kind of had like figured it out? And it's an influence that it's of like that pointing fingers, where it's like they're the cause of the issue.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So then there's no like resolution.
Not in a way that costs the politicians anything.
That's exactly what's happening. Every time my phone rings and it's somebody from my family or my old college roommate, they're all screaming about Trump. It's working perfectly. As the Democrats love to have Trump because he's their number one fundraiser. CNN loves to have Trump because their ratings are through the roof, which means their profits are through the roof. Everybody loves to have this broken system, and nobody wants to fix the system. They want to talk about the symptom of it, which is Donald Trump.
The ones that are for are the ones making money for it, and they're the ones that have the power to change it. Of course, they're not going to change it because they're still making money from it. What's the incentive then for them to change the system?
Yeah. If you make money from the status quo, you don't want to change the status quo.
I guess if some of them who are like, they don't care about money, but they really do care about, like, I don't know, they worry about what's going to happen to their grandkids.
Yeah, but those people are, there's so many votes. Those people are probably outnumbered.
So you're right. People do understand it's broken, but then they go to their media and their media tells them it's the Republicans. And then the other media tells them it's the Democrats. And that's the beauty of this two-party system.
Chinese.
If you're a rapacious oligarch, you can do this forever because they've been doing it forever. And it works like a charm. And
it's so good.
It is such a great con. And then to get a guy like Bernie Sanders to make sure there's never a third party that's viable that forms. What a brilliant strategy by those people to use him like that. What a beautiful strategy. And he plays it like to a T. Even right now, he's staying on the ballot. Instead of rising up, saying Joe Biden's demented and saying, give me the goddamn nomination because I have the solutions to our problems right now. Right now, he's gaslighting his own followers, telling them that Joe Biden has the solutions to our problems. And the only problem we really have is Donald Trump. It is a mental situation that's happening right now. It's how we go. It's how our country collapses. And by the way, we're in what do you call a country where 80% of the workers live paycheck to paycheck? That's a country to me that's already collapsed. That's a failed system. That's what I've been saying for years on this show. What do you call a system that takes the richest country in the world and makes 80% of its workers live paycheck to paycheck? You call that a failed system. It's time to start over. And there isn't a politician saying that, is there?
That's insane. 80% live paycheck to paycheck. 4 out of 5 people have no savings, no assets. Like they can't get $500 together. Like,
a lot of people believe they do because they've got like a mortgage. And
no, they have
asset.
debt.
Yes, that's
different.
That's the difference.
That's not
So a lot of people, because you're allowed.
An asset is something you can sell. You can't sell your debt.
but you live. They are tricked.
No, yeah.
Thinking that because I have this asset, because I have this and this and this, but it's like, how many years of debt have you signed on to that's making it like where it's actually not, but they can list it
if you're,
as an asset always once you have it. That's how you can work your credit.
If it can be repossessed, it's
like if you do something where it's like you go bankrupt.
So when he says we need to start over because it's like a failed system, 80% are living paycheck to paycheck, what does that look like?
It looks like
do we just have to let the economy correct? Like, how did? Well, I guess he just has to do research because it's like, how did the Great Depression resolve? Did people just let it crash and then the government had to step in?
No, God, no. The politicians are all about blaming the other side. We all know that. I mean, listen, it's hard for me to rebut your pessimism just as it's hard for me to rebut Umair's pessimism, especially because my own reporting tends to reinforce your narrative or Umair's narrative. I simply hang on to the belief that when that many people understand the issue, that something less terrible might occur. But again, that may be a function of my own delusion, and you make an extremely valuable point, which is when 80% of the people live paycheck to paycheck, you've already arrived at the destination.
We're
You're
already
not
there.
waiting to be a failed state.
Right, we are.
You're a two-class society of the rich and the poor. And
So that's a good question then. If he considers this a failed state, by what metric do you measure a healthy state? By the amount of people who are financially healthy?
All the people that they're independent, so they don't need any state help, government help. They're not reliant on the government for things that like
but
the
isn't
retirement and stuff. Like the government and the way that
isn't that what Americans try to do? They don't want government help.
I know. That's why we're a failed state, because although people are trying to do that, they can't seem to get out of it. Like they keep getting stuck in either these crashes.
I know. So I'm saying, what does a healthy state look like? Are there any healthy states in the world?
Oh yeah, that's why they say like the European and Canada and stuff. It's like even though people complain about the living expenses in Toronto and stuff, or this big they're still they're not going bankrupt over medical
So is the measure of a healthy state the financial well-being of its citizens?
Right.
Okay.
Because the government's the one that's in charge of how the money,
So
their
China,
currency is used and run. Like they're the ones that write the legislation. They're the ones that are in charge of the banks.
China is like lifting millions of people out of poverty. Does that mean according to the metric of how many people you have financially well off in your state, does that mean China is a more successful state than the United States?
By world measures, people say yeah. By lots of different measures.
And they have like 8 times the population or something. They have like way more people than us. Anyways, all right, let's keep going.
The government works as the employee of the rich on the belief that the poor shall never revolt, basically.
I mean, it's one thing that
as
it's
long
one
as
thing.
they don't recognize.
It's the movie.
they don't know.
It's the movie of Bug's Life. If you've ever seen A Bug's Life, that's what goes on in America. We are ruled by a class of grasshoppers who are super rich, and we are the ants. We outnumber them,
They tried
but
to
only
teach me this in Cuba.
only if we work
It's like,
together.
oh, sorry, too late. I've already been brainwashed by the Americans.
Yes, if you want,
Next out.
if you want to understand American politics, just watch A Bug's Life. Okay, let's keep going.
Have a poor society where everyone has health care and education. That's one thing. But to have a country where everyone's poor and they're constantly scrambling for health care, constantly scrambling to educate their children, constantly scrambling to pay their bill. I mean, I see it. You know, it's people are. That's why our life expectancy is going the other way. That's why suicides are up.
Yeah, do you have, like, I don't have health insurance. Do you have health insurance? We get health insurance through our state, but not everyone lives in California. So we're better off than most people. But then even for me, I don't ever plan on seeing a doctor. I'm just like, if something really goes wrong,
emergency. Yeah, we go to the emergency room.
So that must seem insane to people who live in like Canada or Japan. They're like, what? You can't just go to the hospital? It's like, no.
Do you have $10,000?
Yeah.
Do you have good insurance?
I would have to sell all of my electronics and my car. All right, let's go on.
What's your copay? Even when I had insurance, I'm like, do I have money for a copay? What's my
Right.
deductible? And they're like, what's your deductible? Health insurance has deduct. Like they're thinking maybe she's talking about car insurance or.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, this is for health. And it's like, how is?
It's like toll roads. If you live in a place where you have freeways and you have to go to a place where you have to constantly pay to use the roads, you're like, why?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a private industry. All right, let's go on.
And by the way, you know, Dylan, let me ask you this. People like to blame China is our economic enemy and they're imperialists now and we have to look out for them. Isn't it the fact, Dylan, that is the system that the United States set up? We set up this system where we outsource all our manufacturing and our basically economy to China. Even Silicon Valley gets all their stuff made in China by low-wage workers. Didn't we? Jack Ma was the person who made this observation. He is the Jeff Bezos of Asia, and he said it wasn't China who did this. It was the United States businessmen who set up this system, and now you guys want to blame China. Isn't that what's happening?
That's absolutely that's absolutely the case. I mean, I've said this before. I mean, I said this in my book. I went into details of this in the book. I devoted a lot of time with my journalism to this very subject. The core issue is that U.S. multinationals, Apple, Nike, companies like this, use their control of our government to exploit the profitability of the cheap labor in Asia for their enrichment while not paying taxes in America. So they gutted the American labor force. They leveraged the Chinese labor force, and they withheld the tax revenue from the whole process while collapsing the middle class. China didn't do that to America. Apple and Nike did that to America.
So I think
America did it to America.
This is why Trump is so refreshing as a politician, because he'll call it out. But none of the
because he doesn't know what he's not supposed to say.
But he said, like, he's a little more manipulative though, because he'll still pivot it in a way where China's the enemy, because he's like, we've been getting ripped off by China.
When he needs to.
Right. No, but those are his words. We've been getting ripped off by China. And it's like, well, yeah, but we did the ripping off on ourselves. And it's like we get
mad and call it them ripping us off when they have the upper hand, but when we have it, we'll just call it like we're just negotiating.
But it's not even they have the upper hand. At least the corporations in America were exploiting their cheap workforce while taking it out of America and not paying taxes on it. And so they won in like three ways.
They wanted to get profit. They wanted to be profitable, but you can only go so far, and it's before.
Well, but this is the thing. It's like we can't blame them for the globalization or whatever enemy that we see them now economically when we set them up that way. We're the ones that
did that. Yeah, we set the stone in motion.
We joke about how many things are made in China, but it's like how many U.S. companies went to buy from China. That's the issue. It's not that China makes a lot of things. It's just that the demand was there because America moved the manufacturing there.
And even people who try to build and make stuff here, they can't compete with the people who are importing their stuff. And their companies even look like they're American companies, but everything's coming from China. Like we can't beat the pricing and the manufacturing.
Yeah, and that's really where it becomes a government failure, because government is the only institution that can regulate trade. Come on, government, get it together. Okay. Let's keep going. 3 minutes left.
So it seems like, to me then, the propaganda around China right now is just that, no?
Well, sure. I mean, China is hostile to American interests insofar as it is looking out for its self-interest, and it views itself as one of the great powers of the world, if not the greatest power in the world, if you were to ask them. So they're going to behave in a way that is in that same primal, acquisitive, imperial fashion, which is really exemplified by the United States. But the thing that happened was the U.S. multinationals, led by Nike and Apple, empowered China to their imperial tendencies at our expense because it was to the benefit of American corporations, even if it's to the detriment of the United States.
That's I just realized something even scarier. It's not that the U.S. empowered China, it's that corporations have the ability to empower any government by taking their business there.
Yeah, why do you think there's that's why we said it's so hairy in US, because business has such, and corporations and money has such a strong say in our legal stuff. And it's like, oh, it's like that anywhere.
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this for a long time. It's like a lot of people still bring up the separation of church and state, and they're like, build this wall, or, there's like things. And I think we're entering now a period where the next social revolution is going to have to be a separation of like corporation and state. And it's like these corporations now have such a strong influence that they can like literally build up like another country's economy in like a decade or 2 decades.
Right.
So it's not to say that China, like, is an alligator good or bad?
Oh.
That alligators.
And they also taught them, because some of the biggest things we had issues with when we were getting stuff from China as a company that manufactured parts, and like some of the parts, the cheapest you could get was out of China, but it's because those American companies went there, those big ones, they gave them a good template for quality control. And so we were starting to get even better stuff. So a lot of people before, like a couple decades ago, would have been like, oh, if it's from China, it must be bad quality. But now they're competing on quality too. That's why I was talking about upper hand. Now people don't care if it's made in China. You know what I mean?
Well, I think people understood from the beginning, anything can be made in China. It's a quality control that...
Yeah, but now they do ISO standard manufacturing.
Yeah.
They do like all these kinds of
Yeah,
things.
you have to
They're
pay for
able
it, but it's there.
Yeah, but paying for it there is, again, way
But I think
cheaper than paying for it here. And they know once they get qualified, then they can distribute to
Right, and I think
everywhere.
once big business moves into there and they build the factories that have to manufacture them, at that point, the companies in China that are manufacturing, they don't care who's buying from them. So they'll sell as many as they want to whoever wants to buy it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, because they're all about produce
once
and sell. Produce
the
and
big
sell.
businesses move in there, it's much easier for the smaller businesses then to put their order after they figure out how to make them. And that's why it's like
that's
this.
how I would always source my stuff. I would piggyback because you can get that bulk price for so much cheaper. And it's so much cheaper just to fill their cargo ships to get it across than to leave it empty.
Yeah,
that's how I got my stuff here faster too. Find a little corner that was empty and they needed to fill it before they shipped it.
So Dylan Ratigan was saying, is China good or bad? And then he was comparing it to an alligator. He's like,
bad.
China's like an alligator. Is an alligator
gonna do
good or
what it
bad?
does.
No, it's
Yeah.
an alligator, right? So that's where we are.
Alligator, right?
Right.
Well, if you're feeding puppies to the alligator, is it the alligator's fault that he's eating the puppies?
Right.
Or is it the person who's drove up a truck of puppies and started feeding them to the alligator? And so it's not that I view China as benign politically or socially. It's that China's ambition is logical from their standpoint and known and knowable by Bill Clinton and Bob Rubin and everybody that did all those deals in the 90s. And they knew what they were dealing with, and they made a conscious decision to align with that power with that force in China at the explicit expense of America.
Yeah, they have a long history. I mean, granted, shorter than America's, but they've been around for like 80, 100 years. Somewhere around the
China,
time. Yeah, the
CCP.
current government of
China's
China.
been around for a long time, but
Right.
they've had a lot of like
And so
regime changes.
they can pretty much act in like predictable ways because we understand after studying them for so long, we kind of understand their motivations and so that's why he's saying
any
it's like
country's motivations to
we
like, get ahead
drove
in
up
the global economy.
we drove up the truck of puppies, which I guess is the American middle class, and just started throwing it to China, knowing full well that the economic benefits that they're going to receive are going to be enormous. So of course they're gonna take them all. Mm-hmm. So we got sold out.
Yeah.
So blaming China is no different than blaming the Republicans or the Democrats.
Yes.
It's like the
Because
Cold
when I
War.
blame
when I was
China,
telling people about it.
oh, you China just magically
made
is
up this
exploiting
whole
America.
Russia thing.
Well, how in the heck can China just randomly do that? Guess what? They can't. But when the global consumer demand for every screen in the world, not just Apple, comes from China, when all global apparel comes from China. I mean, I'm not going to run everything that comes out of
Right.
China, whether it's pharmaceuticals,
Soon it's
etc.
gonna come from space.
The Chinese didn't bring that
Don't
there.
worry, y'all.
The Americans brought that there.
Soon all our materials will
Yeah,
come
China
from outer space.
China didn't come to America selling their shit. We went there and bought it or made them make it for us.
Yeah, we're like, here, you make this, and then we'll buy it. And they're like, okay, good deal. And they're gonna keep making it because we keep buying it.
So this is a good quote from Kier. We love the NHS. And this is something I hear. It's like the first thing anyone
Americans don't understand.
No.
what it
Anyone
is.
who if you know anyone who comes from a country who has a national healthcare service and they come to the United States, the first thing they say is like, yeah, I get all my healthcare stuff done in the country. Like where when I go back. And it's like, yeah, it just must seem insane to people that don't live here how expensive healthcare is.
We didn't have insurance when we were growing up, and then when I went to Cuba, and I got insurance through my school when I went to university.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's expensive. And then when I started working, it would go with my job or whatever. But then when I went to Cuba and I showed up, it was like first week, and I had some kind of like infection in my eye. Like they took, and I didn't even speak.
Oh yeah, Cuba.
Spanish
The
or
country that the
anything,
U.S.
and
embargoed.
They sent me in an ambulance from my school to Havana to see an eye doctor to get medicine off. I'm like, how much is this going to cost? And they're looking at me like,
Yeah.
what?
Well, because in America, we're used to paying for things, except for soda refills and napkins at restaurants. Hi, everyone. Hope you liked the video. Remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more.
Happy 420, wherever you are. Bye.
And if you don't have buds, we're your buds.